now. Okay.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming and taking time to listen to my speech. Tonight I would like to share with you probably a sad story, but I believe very inspirational story about human decency and courage and love that perhaps has not changed the entire world, but it has changed many, many lives. It is a story about a young Polish girl named Ewelina. I believe at that time she was just 20 years old, and that story happened during German occupation, when Germany occupied Warsaw, and it's a story about how she saved Jewish children and from either dying at Warsaw Ghetto or being put to death at gas chamber later down south in Poland. So it was a time when Germans began establishing Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, and the way they did was pretty horrific. They literally hoarded thousands and thousands of Jewish families into an area not bigger than probably 16 square blocks, and they surrounded them with high brick walls. People there kept hope in the beginning, but then later their life began to deteriorate, and they started to die. They started to die simply because they didn't have food, and they were dying from diseases and very poor hygiene. So their situation was pretty critical, and they probably knew that they were destined to die, and that only hope they could receive was help from people from outside the walls, Polish Christian people. And one of those persons who really was dedicated to help them was Ewelina, and she was one of the very few people who was actually able gaining access to legally ghetto through social welfare department. She worked for them as a social worker, and she started visiting daily, delivering food and delivering medicines for them, and she was very concerned about their situation, and she believed that she at least could save some of the children living there by simply sneaking them through, perhaps through the walls, and finding families for them, someone who would shelter them. So she recruited trustful people who had a legal access to ghetto, and who would have the best chance of smuggling those children through the gates. And this is how it all started. The children began to be carried out in mechanic toolbox, or in the ambulance, or in a coffin, underneath the dead person. They did not have a funeral services there, so whoever was dead, was just simply lying on the floor and was picked and moved out of the way. So this is how little by little those children were able to get on the other side of the ghetto. And probably the most horrendous task she was facing was to pursue mothers, to pursue fathers and families to give away their children. And then she was often asked by mothers, "Can you guarantee that my child will live?" And the only answer she had was, "Well, I can guarantee you that it will die if it stays here." So luckily, all 2,500 children were successfully brought into safety, and Ewelina already found many families and who would openly accept children. That was pretty amazing, because any help from Polish to Jewish people who were hiding them was equivalent to death, and also death to their immediate families, so it was pretty risky. But she also recruited people through their contacts, organized identification for those children. So they had new birth certificates and new Christian names, and she was very religious about and noting it and encoding it and keeping it for further records. So unfortunately, at some point, Nazis became aware of her activities, and she was arrested, imprisoned, and she was tortured, and that was probably 3 years after 1943. And she ended up in worse possible situation. She got broken legs and broken feet, but she never got, they never broke her spirit actually, and she has never ever give up a single name or single address. So she was sentenced to death, but through intervention of Polish resistance movement, her execution was withheld, and eventually she was released. Today, Miss Ewelina is like 97 years old, and she still lives in her Warsaw apartment, and for many years her wartime was not recognized till recently, and she received many, was honored by many international organizations and received distinctive titles, but she still claims that no credit for her actions. And to this day she says, I could have done more, and I regret that this regret is gonna follow me to the end of my life. And for me, she's a real true Polish hero and exceptional person. Thank you.